Revealed, the incredible inheritance from my rich aunt after 15 years. Surprisingly, my Abandonin Emily Baxter stood at the crumbling intersection of her past and present, the letter trembling in her hands like a fragile leaf caught in a swirling wind. Her estranged aunt, a distant figure from childhood, was suddenly a tangible presence again, a rich aunt, nonetheless, with a life she could hardly fathom. An inheritance, they said, an ancient mansion and a neglected art studio. The news was electric, shocking, twisting the mundane contours of her life into something stranger, brighter. Yet, that brightness felt like a looming shadow, a reminder of dreams she never dared to foster. For years, Emily worked tirelessly as a nurse, juggled motherhood, and dodged the weight of bills like a skilled dancer evading misstep. Her talent for art lay buried, undiscovered beneath layers of self-doubt and family betrayal. Memories of her childhood echoed around her, a childhood marred by abandonment, held together by her steadfast grandmother who raised her on resilient love and scrappy determination. The prospect of stepping into that mansion now felt like a cruel joke. Who was she, after all? A single mother barely scraping by, unworthy of wealth when her aunt had turned her back on family, on Emily herself. As she drove to the mansion, the opulence crept into view. Statues lined the path. The grand entrance loomed larger with each passing moment. She hesitated, breath hitching at the thought of walking through those doors. What awaited her inside? The mansion echoed stories, lives lived lavishly, all while she had trudged through obscurity. And the studio? Would it be a sanctuary of inspiration, or a choking reminder of her own failings? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. Inside the mansion, the shadows whispered secrets as she stepped cautiously into her aunt's former life. The art studio stood forlorn, canvases and brushes quietly pleading to be freed from their dusty tombs. But, as the warmth of sunlight bathed the neglected space, doubts sank under her skin like a chill. Would the town accept her? Memories of her rival, Sarah, surfaced like a bad dream, an established artist who once relished in Emily's failures. The tension gripped her, the thought of competing with someone who had thrived while she'd been stifled. Could she breathe life back into the studio and let it bloom? Or would she lose it all to Sarah's ambition, like everything else she had fought for? As these thoughts tangled in her mind, a flicker of determination ignited. No more was she to quietly exist in her shadows. She would reclaim not just her aunt's legacy, but her lost identity as well. Yet as Emily's resolve strengthened, so did the haunting fear of whether it would all vanish in an instant, just as it had in her childhood. What if failure was her only companion? With every breath, the stakes grew higher. The weight of legacy, ambition, and her crushing self-doubt rolled into one insurmountable mountain. The studio doors creaked open. The air felt thick with anticipation, echoing the fight waiting to happen within her. Would she allow her fear to swallow her whole, or would she make her stand? The hallway stretched like a chasm, paving the way to her dreams, but also to her deepest anxieties. Emily drew a breath. Here stood the art of creation, begging to burst forth, but the echoes of her past loomed ominously as she stepped forward, questioning if she dared to unleash the artist buried within. Emily felt the sunlight overhead shift, momentarily dimming as a cloud drifted in front of it. The fluctuation mirrored her thoughts, oscillating between inspiration and paralyzing self-doubt. She stood on the threshold of the art studio, heart pounding, feeling the weight of her aunt's legacy pressing against her like a heavy shroud. The canvases leaned crookedly against the walls, as though waiting for an eager hand to unlock their potential. Could that hand be hers? She took a tentative step inside. Dust motes danced in the golden light filtering through the grimy windows, and a flush of nostalgia washed over her, intertwined with trepidation. What if she was unworthy of this space? What if she lacked the skill, the vision, to breathe life into her aunt's abandoned dreams? These questions tumbled through her mind, threatening to drown out the whisper of hope that also flickered inside her, a flicker that had lain dormant for years. In the far corner, a large canvas awaited. The surface was rough and pockmarked, remnants of an unfinished piece. Emily's fingers itched to touch it, to explore not only the texture, but also the possibilities that lay beneath the layers of neglect. She couldn't ignore how profoundly the sight affected her, a dormant passion sparking at the edges of her consciousness. She closed her eyes for a moment, envisioning the colors she could lay down, the strokes that could tell a story that was uniquely hers. Yet Sarah's looming presence dug into her thoughts like sharp thorns. Emily reminded herself that they were from different worlds. Sarah, a darling of the art scene, thrived on flaunting her successes, while Emily had spent years tending to lives and healing others. But these silken threads of comparison felt suffocating. She had to shatter that narrative, had to stop being a bystander in her own existence, clinging to memories of inadequacy. As she aroused her creativity, an unexpected resolve solidified within her. What if she transformed the studio into her sanctuary? What if she began again, carving out a place where self-expression flourished against her inherent fear? This studio could be a canvas, not just for paint, but for rebuilding her identity one brushstroke at a time. With newfound energy coursing through her, Emily approached the supply cabinet against the wall. The hinges creaked as she opened it, revealing artists' materials long forgotten. Paint tubes lay like relics, some exploded, others merely dried shells. Yet, as she sifted through the disarray, she couldn't help but revel in the idea of reclamation. Each brush, every torn canvas, whispered potential. A flash of clarity struck her. Reclaiming this space was a vital step toward reclaiming herself. If she were to face not only Sarah but the deep-seated fears that had plagued her, she needed to redefine her own narrative. She had been a caretaker for too long. Now it was time to resurrect the artist. But as she prepared to make her first mark, the familiar specter of doubt seeped in again. What if her efforts only brought more reminders of inadequacy? What if Sarah's success overshadowed her blossom? This internal strife bubbled to the surface, threatening to silence her. With gritted teeth, Emily resolved not to back down. This wasn't just about art, it was about her, the promise of her own strength and capability. She would paint that first stroke in defiance of her fears, not because she was free from them, but because she was ready to confront them head-on. And with her hands trembling with both anticipation and tension, Emily lifted a brush. The moment hovered in the air, a pivotal choice dawning before her. Ready or not, she inhaled deeply, knowing this wasn't merely about reclaiming a legacy, but embracing her future. Outside, a car approached, the sound of engine revving piercing the air. Emily's gaze snapped to the window, dread prickling at the nape of her neck. Who could it be? A future rival? An unwelcome visitor? The world beyond her sanctuary felt urgent and alive, ready to intrude upon her burgeoning self-discovery. She could stand her ground, or she could let the world consume her again. The choice loomed, heavy with consequence, carving the next chapter of her story. Emily's heart raced as she caught sight of the car pulling up. Her instincts screamed for her to retreat, to hide in the sanctuary she was just beginning to claim as her own. The engine quieted, but the silence felt thick with the promise of intrusion. She was about to take the first step toward expressing her identity, yet outside her sanctuary stood a potential catalyst for her doubt to consolidate Sarah, the one whose success had loomed over her for years. Taking a steadying breath, Emily swiveled to the easel she had dragged from the corner. Should she start? The paintbrush grazed the tip of her fingers as if it were alive, pulsating with the urgency of her resolve. But then the back door swung open, and a figure stepped out. Emily? It was Sarah's voice, smooth yet tainted with a familiarity that made Emily's stomach churn.
Bus.
Emily called back, the sound feeling weak even as it left her lips. The heaviness of her aunt's legacy bore down on her like the oppressive weight of expectation. She squeezed the brush, channeling her nerves. This was about more than just art. This was about claiming her space, her identity, amidst the shadows of comparison. Mind if I come in? I've heard so much about the studio. Sarah's voice was playful, as if the words were innocent even though they felt like a challenge. This studio matters to me. It's not a gallery for you to showcase your latest achievements, Emily muttered under her breath, the grip on the brush tightening painfully. But even as she prepared to dismiss Sarah, the imagery of the unfinished canvas spoke louder than her reluctance. This was her moment to establish boundaries not just against Sarah, but against every whisper of self-doubt that had ever held her back. Swallowing her hesitation, she took a step toward the door. She would confront Sarah, not just for herself, but for every moment her confidence had been ground under the weight of comparison. With a steadying breath, Emily flung the door open, seeing Sarah's confident smile dim slightly at the lack of warm welcome. "What brings you here, Sarah?" she asked, her tone steady. "Just thought I'd check in on the family legacy, you know? It's exciting to see what you're going to make of it," Sarah replied, her gaze sweeping over the space. That single observation felt like a double-edged sword, each word layered not only with interest but with expectation. Emily glared at her rival, feeling the tension twist in her chest. "I'm planning to make something meaningful. Something true to myself," she asserted, pushing her fear aside, grappling with newfound brandishes of determination. "Oh, like what?" The question slipped from Sarah's lips in a tone that dripped with condescension, but Emily caught the flicker of curiosity beneath it. Emily stiffened, caught off guard by the challenge. What would it mean to stand firm in her vision? Her throat tightened as a myriad of responses flooded her mind, half-formed outlines of a life reclaimed through art. Each prospect tugged at her heartstrings, igniting the spark of creativity. "I'm going to explore the ideas of identity. And maybe I'll create something vivid, something raw," she said, the conviction resonating with each syllable, bolder now. Sarah's laughter danced through the air, laced with disbelief. "Oh, darling, bold is good. But raw? Are you sure you can handle that?" That question hung suspended, smothering any remaining warmth in the air. The specter of doubt began to creep back, nibbling at the edges of Emily's resolve. Could she really handle the scrutiny, let alone the sheer act of being vulnerable to the world through her art? "Watch me," Emily heard herself reply, a fierce spark igniting in her chest even as uncertainty flickered within. With that declaration echoing through the moment, she realized this was not merely a test against Sarah's skepticism, but against her own hesitations. As Sarah turned to leave, a sly smile lingered, suggesting that the real challenge had just begun. Emily knew that this moment was significant. She was terrified but invigorated, pushing the boundaries of her comfort into unknown territories where her potential could be explored. But uneasily, doubts lingered, whispering the familiar tales of inadequacy. What if Sarah was right? What if Emily turned vulnerable not into art, but into a weapon of her own undoing? The question loomed large, an unresolved thread in a tapestry she had only begun to weave. With the door closing, Emily turned back to the canvas, her heart thudding. What was she truly capable of if she dared to discover herself in the face of doubt? The weight of her next mark felt like destiny's challenge. The sound of the door clicking shut felt like a gavel falling, sealing the space between Emily and her rival. As a tense silence enveloped the studio, she could feel the atmosphere thick with unfulfilled potentials. She stood before the large blank canvas, her breath hitching every time her imagination brushed against the doubts Sarah had sown. This was more than just paint on a surface. It was a declaration of all the years she had spent hiding in the shadow of expectations that felt crushingly stiff. Emily felt the brush in her hand pulse like a heartbeat, a reminder of the life she yearned to infuse into her art. But what did vivid and raw truly look like to her? She knew the formulas. Bright colors, bold strokes echoed in her mind as the standard for rawness. But was that enough? She needed something deeper, something that reached into the layers of her identity, something that could withstand the scrutiny of Sarah's adversarial gaze. Taking a step back from the easel, Emily allowed her shoulders to relax. She closed her eyes, letting her thoughts drift towards the memories woven into her past. There had been days spent in her aunt's studio, basking in unspoken lessons of color theory and composition, but also in the silent, stifling presence of competition. She recalled afternoons watching her aunt effortlessly create, brushing against brilliant ideas with a swiftness she had envied. That envy burned a little less fiercely now. Instead of resentment, she began to feel a flicker of curiosity. What if she didn't just emulate the past, but instead redefined it? Aged wisdom was not merely to be inherited. It could transform through her hands. As she opened her eyes, they landed back on the canvas. It seemed to challenge her, daring her to take risks beyond the familiar paths of her artistic upbringing. Gritting her teeth, she dipped the brush into the vibrant azure paint, the color landing like a splash of bold conviction on the pristine surface. Would it be enough to silence her inner critique? With each stroke, Emily's confidence began to build. Uncertainty hovered at the edges, but she pressed on. Shades began to melt into one another, tumultuous yet beautiful, echoing the chaos and joy that defined her journey thus far. She wasn't replicating her aunt's legacy. She was claiming it, reshaping it into her own exploration of identity. The juxtaposition of dark and light colors mirrored her internal journey, reflecting both fear and determination. But just as momentum surfaced, Sarah's laughter echoed in her thoughts like an unwelcome specter. What if this transformed canvas was floundering in its incompleteness? What if Emily was destined to be an imitation, stuck forever in an unremarkable shadow of brilliance? The edginess twisted in her stomach like a constant reminder of the past. Gazing at her work and feeling the weight of the brush in her hand, she acknowledged a decision staring back at her. This was a moment of vulnerability, one that could make or break her initial attempts at self-expression. Should she keep pushing beyond the canvas into the realm of true exploration, embracing the discomfort of exposing herself through her art? Dropping the brush, Emily stepped back, her heart racing. Her next move could twist her narrative either toward authenticity or caving into the lure of an easier path, one filled with safe colors and predictable patterns. She glanced at the clock. Time slipped through her fingers, though it was never where her focus lay. It was on that canvas, alive with potential. Clenching her fists, she took another step toward the easel. Determined, she poured the remnants of her doubt into paint, channeling it into every harsh line, every vibrant splash. A deeper truth was bubbling to the surface, aching for expression. Would she embrace the upcoming challenges, or retreat into safety? This was more than just a battle with self-doubt. It was a confrontation with her own evolving identity. But the more she leaned into vulnerability, the more she felt her art call to her, an invitation wrapped in risk. Amidst swirling colors and the echo of her heart, a thought settled. The first unveiling was yet to come, and she could feel the electricity of something monumental stirring beneath the surface. What awaited her in this raw exploration of self-expression? Emily inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of her decision hovering just above the chaotic swirl of colors. Her heart raced, a steady drumbeat urging her forward. With renewed purpose, she grabbed a larger brush, its bristles a promise of power to disrupt the familiar, to stretch beyond the boundaries of her previous artistic constraints. She needed to pare down the noise, eliminate distractions, and influence her art with intent. As she worked, each stroke felt like a declaration. Freedom surged through her fingertips as she carved out shapes and patterns from the blank expanse. She channeled the feeling of being overshadowed, her fears morphing into bold, jagged forms against the smooth canvas. Her brush hesitated momentarily. Could she truly express the tumult of her identity? Would her vulnerability, laid bare in vibrant hues, withstand the scrutiny of the world outside the studio? Determined not to let self-doubt dictate her progress, she finally donned the courage to embrace imperfection. Each failure she had ever faced transformed into a new hue, a messy blend of reds and oranges seeping into her work, embodying the passion that had lain dormant for far too long. In the depths of creation, wild bursts of inspiration struck her. Memories of past failures and the nagging thoughts of Sarah fueled a fire within her. It was a familiar flame, one that had compelled her to create but had simultaneously shackled her. This time, she wouldn't let it be a double-edged sword. She would transform that flame into a beacon. Her mind started to clear. She was no longer just painting. She was conversing with herself. The brush became an extension of her thoughts, each movement reflective of her triumphs and trials. The colors morphed, her artistic voice growing stronger, shouting against the silence Sarah had instilled. It was an evolution she had long feared, grasping the intricacies of her existence and mirroring them fearlessly on canvas. As she stepped back, sweat mingling with excitement on her brow, she found herself captivated by the vibrant landscape of colors and shapes. What had begun as mere chaos had coalesced into a tapestry of Emily's experiences, heartbreaks, aspirations, the collision of her past with the emerging force of her present. This was not her aunt's influence any longer. This was uniquely her own. Sarah's voice faded into the background. But just then, a doubt flickered in the corner of her mind like a flickering candle flame. What if, in her fervor, she had gone too far? Had she dared to expose too much? The fear of judgment clutched at her throat, threatening to unfurl the strength she had built. A haunting thought began to circle her brain. Did she truly believe in the authenticity of what she created, or was she merely seeking acceptance? The questions pressed heavily against her chest. If Sarah saw this, what would she think? Would she laud it or tear into it with her venom-laced remarks? Emily felt the familiar urge to retreat, to restore the safety of obscurity, the allure of blending in. Yet, as she looked at the canvas bold, raw, and completely her own, she couldn't shake the fervor tugging at her heart. This wasn't simply about silencing Sarah. This was about unveiling the essence of Emily beyond the confines of expectation and inhibition. Gathering her nerves, she dipped her brush back into the paint. With explosive confidence, she began layering the earlier strokes, allowing the bold colors to mix. With each sweep, she pushed the limits of traditional expectation, losing herself in the creation, the canvas becoming a refuge for her expression, not just a surface for art. It wasn't merely about winning a contest anymore. It was about sharing a piece of her evolving narrative with an audience, an exposure of her flaws merged with her strengths. As the brush glided over the surface, she anchored herself in the moment, feeling the pulse of hope and resolution ignite within her very core. Having surrendered to her instinctual drive, she let go of the fear, a choice that echoed loudly in her own mind. Emily was on the brink of something significant, a revelation not just through her art, but within herself. What unknown strength would manifest from this bold step into the true character of her artistry? And as she began to wonder about the path ahead, anticipation tinged with trepidation owned her thoughts. What would happen next if her tentative unveiling beckoned her toward unforeseen challenges? The rhythmic movements of her brush began to settle into a rhythm as the hours slipped by unnoticed. Paint splattered on the floor around her like confetti, evidence of a celebration that was uniquely her own. Each color she introduced spoke with an authenticity she had long dismissed, as if they were a chorus singing her identity back into existence. The room, once just a space of creation, transformed into a sanctuary. The scent of turpentine invigorated her spirit, amplifying her confidence layer by layer. In that haven, the chaos outside melted away. The louder, more oppressive questions receded into a dull whisper, retreating as she embraced the tumult of her existence. She was becoming an artist not just in skill, but in raw expression of self. Yet, vulnerability coursed through her veins like a shadow at dusk. With increased clarity came the overwhelming fear of what this expression could invite: scrutiny, ridicule, even the imagined disdain of those she had once admired. The gnawing thought struck her: if she evolved artistically, would she also have to confront the remnants of her past, proof of a person she was desperately trying to escape, A sudden surge of energy propelled her toward her supply cabinet, her mind racing as she rummaged through tubes of paint. It was time to push beyond mere self-reflection. Carefully, she set aside the acrylics for oil paints, their smooth texture promising an ability to blend that matched her need to merge her complex emotions onto the canvas. Each stroke now felt like an invitation, an unspoken challenge to others to see her, to accept the messy reality of who she was emerging to be. As the bold colors melded together, so did ideas about her future. The contest, once the pinnacle of her ambition, now seemed negligible in the face of the deeper revelations that were bubbling forth. She was standing at the crossroads of art and authenticity, a path that would either lead her back toward the shadows of expectation or into the blinding light of unfiltered self-expression. Emily's thoughts flitted back to her once idolized aunt. Would she approve of Emily's risk-taking or dismiss it as immature fancy? Her heart clenched at the thought of her aunt's scorn, echoing the judgment she experienced throughout her childhood. As she let the brush glide across the canvas, she made a conscious choice to delve deeper, embracing a complexity that represented both her past and her aspirations, rather than distancing herself from it. The narrative began to shape itself, a visual story hung on the walls of her mind. Each layer of paint was infused with not only the urgency of her unfolding self, but also her commitment to face the ghosts of judgment, whether real or imagined. She swirled colors into shapes that embodied her journey, a train wreck interwoven with beauty, a calamity presented with grace. Suddenly, the studio door creaked open, disrupting her immersion. The familiar face of her friend Mira peeked in, her brows drawn in surprise at the eruption of color within the confines of Emily's sanctuary. "Wow, this is incredible," Mira exclaimed, stepping inside, her gaze sweeping across the vivid expanse of canvas. Emily felt a surge of anxiety at the prospect of scrutiny, even from a friend. Would Mira see the essence of her evolution, or merely the superficial chaos? "It's just the beginning," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. A determined look crossed Mira's face, curiosity interlaced with an eagerness to engage in the transformation unfolding before them. Mira stepped closer, examining the work critically. "Just the beginning? This looks like a full narrative in motion." Emily swallowed hard, the intensity of Mira's words reflecting a truth she could no longer ignore. If her art could draw such admiration, what other dimensions of her being remained undiscovered? With courage bubbling inside her, she suddenly faced a pivotal decision. Would she share what laid beneath the surface of her canvas? Would opening up to Mira reveal not only her artistic evolution, but also her journey? From the shadows of doubt, Emily's heart thundered as she glimpsed a future filled with possibilities, her vulnerabilities a thread connecting a deeper understanding of herself with the world surrounding her. There was strength in honesty, and now, perhaps, it was time to confront both her past and future through the bridge of her art. Could embracing this unexpected challenge lead her to a new chapter in her life, one where vulnerability transformed into genuine strength? With resolve blooming in her chest, she embarked on the next step, teetering between fear and profound potential. What would it take to reveal her deepest self to the outside world, and how would that decision reshape the very fabric of her identity? Myra's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as she examined every stroke on the canvas, her admiration bubbling just below the surface. "Seriously, Emily, this is where you start to challenge norms. This isn't just art, it's a powerful statement." Emily felt a rush of warmth from Myra's words, but simultaneously wrestled with a tightening in her chest. Was she truly ready for this kind of exposure? She swallowed hard, thoughts spiraling into a maelstrom of self-doubt and anticipation. "I don't know if it is a statement or just me figuring things out," she admitted, her voice barely audible as she gestured vaguely at the swirling colors. The bright blues and fiery reds seemed to mock her uncertainty, their boldness contrasting her own hesitation. Myra's expression softened, an understanding glimmering in her eyes. "Art isn't about having all the answers. It's about exploration and courage. That's precisely what you're doing." Emily's breath hitched as she considered Myra's perspective. Was there a parallel between her artistic journey and her own journey through the fog of self-identity? The question pressed against her consciousness, weighing her down, yet invigorating her at the same time. Do you think people will understand it? Introspection surged after she uttered those words. This was the core of her anxiety, the heart of her fear. What if her deepest expression was met with misunderstanding? What would that say about her? They will, Mira reassured, leaning against the wall, giving Emily the space she needed to confront her insecurities. Just think about it. If you can evoke feelings within yourself through these colors, imagine what it could do for others. Myra's confidence began to unravel the mental knots twisting in Emily's mind. There was a blossoming realization that maybe, just maybe, vulnerability would be her armor rather than her weakness. Emily allowed herself to visualize what it would mean to be bold, to let the world in. I need to push further, Emily found herself declaring, surprising even herself with the conviction in those words. The resolve built like a tidal wave, completely enveloping her, lifting her out of numbness and placing her squarely in the vibrant spectrum of what it meant to share herself. What do you mean? Mira questioned, a tilt of her head conveying curiosity. I want to show the layers, Emily replied, anticipation sparking through her veins. Not just the pretty parts. I want people to see the chaos, the sadness, everything. Her voice wavered, but determination braided itself into her thoughts like an unbreakable thread. Mira stepped closer, eyes unwavering, a smile breaking across her face. That's it. You're not just an artist. You're a storyteller. You're ready to tell your story. Let us do it together. Gathering every ounce of courage, Emily nodded, feeling the urge to share what lay entangled in her mind. I think it's time to talk about the pieces I've never painted. Those unspoken traumas, moments of despair, and the many layers of grief she concealed were clamoring to birth themselves alongside her art. But even as she vocalized her decision, Emily felt a shiver of trepidation. Would confronting these aspects catalyze the reclamation she yearned for? Ignoring the internal alarms blaring caution, she pressed forward. For the next hour, a rush of creativity enveloped them both. Mira pulled out her own sketchpad, and they brainstormed images and symbols that captured not only Emily's story, but the raw essence of her vulnerability. As the conversation flowed, Emily realized that this process of sharing was shaping her in ways she hadn't anticipated. It was becoming a collaborative dance not just with paint, but with honesty, acknowledgement, and courageous exploration. Yet, as the world outside her sanctuary lifted and fell with the rhythm of laughter and lively chatter, the specter of her aunt's disdain haunted the back corners of her mind. Emily had once sought her approval in art. Now, she found herself wanting to shed the weight of that desire. What if she sent this new work to her aunt? A testament not for approval, but as a declaration of self? The thought clamored for her attention, colliding with her growing courage. The challenge loomed ahead, one she couldn't elude forever. Would revealing her truth and vulnerabilities forge the empowerment she craved, or would it set her back into the depths of judgment? There were no guarantees, and the unanswered questions stretched endlessly like unpainted canvases, their potential pressing on her psyche. The time had come to face the consequences of authenticity. Would she embrace the fully unveiled self she was becoming, or retreat into the protective shadows of doubt? As the splendor of colors seemed to pulse with the weight of possibility, Emily realized the moment for decision had arrived. The canvas awaited, and with it, a freedom only art and vulnerability could provide. But would she accept the shadows alongside the light? Standing before the whispering colors, she felt a shift inside, a magnetic pull toward a future rife with creative truth. What awaited her where the horizon of self-discovery met uncharted artistry? The moment settled in the air, electric and thick with potential. Emily stood, a veritable storm of emotions, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the surface of the canvas. This was no longer just a space for her to play with colors. It had transformed into an altar of her inner strife and resilience. What story would emerge when she mingled shades of despair with vibrant hues of joy? The specter of her aunt loomed larger now, whispering memories of critical remarks, dismissive snorts, and unyielding expectations. Questions gnawed at Emily. How could she possibly showcase her unrefined truths? Would her art earn her aunt's scorn or ignite a flicker of understanding? Each brushstroke began to symbolize the battle between the artist she aspired to be and the approval she once relentlessly sought. Ignoring the doubts, Emily decided on a bold approach. Mira, I want to create something that strips away pretense. A piece that bleeds raw, messy, and truthful. The words escaped her as if a dam had burst, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Good. Mira beamed, her enthusiasm amplifying Emily's determination. Let us break it down. What fears or memories do you want to convey? What colors represent those layers? Emily paused, plunging inward to untangle her thoughts. The deep blues for sadness, she began, recalling the shades of grief that had covered her during those suffocating days of loss. Reds for anger, the rage I felt when everything fell apart. And then patches of bright yellow. What's the yellow for? Mira prodded, her pen poised on the sketchpad. Hope, Emily whispered, meeting her friend's gaze. Even amidst the chaos, there were moments of light. As Mira guided her through an exploration of symbols and prompts, Emily felt liberated, like a diver breaking the surface after being submerged for far too long. The brainstorm session transformed into a revelation, unlocking hidden capabilities she hadn't recognized in herself. This artistic journey was not merely about expression. It was about the rebirth of her identity, forged in the fires of vulnerability. With every idea woven into the conversation, Emily discovered connections to her deeper feelings, emotions she had buried under layers of disappointment and self-doubt. Creating art that mirrored her struggles also meant confronting them head-on, a dual process of healing and expression. However, the thrill of creation came with a visceral layer of anxiety wrapped tightly around her gut. The weight of potential criticism loomed larger now, almost suffocating. To send this piece to her aunt would be to lay her heart bare, exposing the wounds and scars haphazardly stitched over time. Would her aunt even care to understand the nuance behind each stroke? Or had years of disdain created a chasm too wide to bridge? Emily wrestled with the growing fear that her vulnerability could easily be interpreted as weakness, something her aunt had taught her to despise. What if her aunt's response only deepened her sense of inadequacy? Yet, in this moment of intense introspection, a small flame of determination flickered again. Maybe this exposure wouldn't be about earning approval, but affirming her identity. What if her art could serve as the catalyst for change in herself, crystallizing her self-worth outside of familial expectations? Consolidating her thoughts, Emily took a deep breath. I think I want to draft a separate piece to accompany my main work, a letter, she said, catching Myra's curious expression. To explain the layers behind my creation. Maybe if I share the context, if she sees how I truly feel, it might resonate. Mira nodded enthusiastically. Yes. Let her see the world through your eyes. This could be transformative for both of you. As the session unfolded, the prospect of unveiling her truest self transformed from a daunting nightmare into an exhilarating challenge. Painting wasn't just an act of creation. It was a declaration of her narrative, raw as it was. The last stroke of the evening brought a sense of satisfaction, and with it, Emily felt a profound shift. She stood back and surveyed the tumultuous colors swirling before her, a symbolic battlefield of her emotions. Each hue represented an ember of her struggle, a testament to the journey she still had ahead. But with the excitement came the piercing thought of her aunt's impending judgment, sharpening the blade of uncertainty once again. Would she believe in the earnestness of a woman standing naked in her truths? Emily felt the tension coil tighter as she looked at her creation, knowing the struggle for acceptance still lay ahead. As midnight approached, Emily found herself on the precipice of a monumental decision, a crossroad where authentic expression confronted the desire for external validation. Would she shed the fear and allow herself the power of vulnerability, or would she slip back into the shadows of self-doubt? Gazing at her unfinished canvas, she couldn't shake the thought that a reckoning awaited, one she could no longer avoid. Embracing her identity hinged on whether she could face her truths without retreating into armor. Tomorrow, when she stood in front of her aunt, all would unravel. The truth awaited, yet so did the risk. Would her commitment to authenticity be enough to withstand the pressure, or would it crumble under the weight of expectations? The canvas pulsed with possibility, echoing the message she longed to convey. The moment of truth was almost at hand. The morning sun filtered through Emily's window, casting a warm, golden light across her studio. It illuminated her canvas, a riot of emotion captured in brushstrokes of blue, red, and yellow. The piece felt both like a reflection of her struggle and an invitation to unlock her past. Yet, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach as she prepared for her aunt's visit. She stared at the canvas, as if searching for reassurance within the chaos she had poured onto it. This new world of self-acceptance felt fragile, teetering on the edge of judgment. Would her aunt recognize the turmoil, or dismiss it as the flighty whims of someone incapable of true artistry? Determined to prepare herself, Emily picked up her notebook. The letter she had envisioned now seemed crucial, not just to explain her creation but to articulate her journey, the darkness and light that had coexisted within her. Pen poised over the crisp page, she wrestled with her thoughts. How could she distill years of hurt and hope into a few succinct sentences? There's power in your truth, she reminded herself. These words, murmured from her heart, echoed against the backdrop of self-doubt. She began to write, her pen digging into the paper like a brush into paint, sculpting her feelings into language. I've learned that art can't be confined to the limits set by others, she wrote, her words flowing like water breaking through a dam. It's formed through pain and the struggle to understand who we are beneath the expectations. Each sentence birthed a surge of confidence, chunks of vulnerability tumbling free and solidifying her resolve. The letter transformed into an armor she could don before her aunt, a shield against potential rejection. Words meant to explain her art became a declaration of her identity. After an hour, she set the letter aside, feeling invigorated but exhausted. Walking through her small studio, she noticed the tools of creativity, brushes, paints, and sketches scattered around like her swirling thoughts. This space had become an extension of herself, chaotic yet exquisite, a testament to her growth. The clock urged her to focus. Her aunt would arrive soon. The encounter felt like standing at the edge of a precipice, teetering between fear and courage. Emily took a moment to breathe deeply, conjuring the strength that had emerged over this journey. This was not just about making art, but about claiming a part of herself that had long been suppressed. The doorbell rang. Emily's heart raced. She allowed herself to acknowledge the storm brewing inside: fear, anticipation, even excitement. She had taken control of her narrative, and now it was time to present her truth. Her aunt swept into the space with an elegance that belied the tension humming between them. An immediate hush cloaked the studio, the weight of unspoken words resting heavily in the air. Emily felt the urge to retreat, to hide behind the fortress of her creations, but a newfound strength rooted her in place. "I've created something for you," Emily said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. With a gesture, she invited her aunt closer to see the canvas. Her pulse quickened at the prospect of unveiling her truth. As her aunt stepped forward, Emily caught a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. But would it transform into appreciation or disdain? The anticipation was palpable. The moment felt ripe with potential, bearing the weight of years spent under critical eyes. "I've written a letter to explain," Emily added, her voice resolute, locking eyes with her aunt. The intensity of their gaze exchanged messages deeper than words could convey. In that instant, the stakes intensified. Emily stood on the brink of revealing not just her art, but the very essence of who she had become amidst turmoil. Would this act of vulnerability resonate, or would it shatter the frail hope she had constructed? The uncertainty enveloped her as she braced for her aunt's response, aware that this confrontation would mark the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. The air between them was charged, and Emily could feel the swells of change rippling through her. Whatever lay ahead had the potential to redefine her journey. Would her art and heart find acceptance, or would the rejection burn the burgeoning confidence she had just begun to claim? The answer loomed, and time slowed as the tension reached its peak, each second pulsing with the possibility of transformation. Emily stood before her canvas, her heart pulsing in sync with the vibrant strokes and colors that represented her most authentic self. Gone were the remnants of self-doubt, overshadowed by her newfound resolve. The distant echo of her aunt's critical remarks faded away as she braced for impending confrontation, prepared to lay bare the essence of her journey. "Emily," her aunt began, eyeing the canvas with an unreadable expression. "This is certainly different." The words hung in the air, dissecting both her art and her soul. Emily felt a ripple of trepidation. After all, how could she expect anyone, even family, to understand the complexity she had sprawled across the canvas? Yet, she knew this was no moment for retreat. It was time to embrace her reality, to break free from the confines of others' expectations. "It's not just colors," she asserted, voice firm even as her palms grew clammy. "It's a reflection of my struggle to truly find myself, a confrontation with pain, anger, and an affirmation of hope." Her aunt stepped closer, scrutinizing the piece with the intensity of a seasoned art critic. The silence felt heavy, almost unbearable. Emily's heart raced, gauging every flicker of emotion crossing her aunt's face. But this time, she refused to let fear hijack her narrative. She addressed the vivid contrasts. She had chosen the dark blues, the fiery reds, the bright bursts of yellow. Each hue told a story of her metamorphosis from an unsure caregiver to a defiant artist. "I've lived in the shades of uncertainty for so long," Emily continued, her voice steadier now, "and this canvas is me reclaiming my identity. I want you to see that this is my truth." A tension-filled moment passed. The woman she had once feared for her disapproval stood before her, allowing the gravity of Emily's words to wash over her. And then, as if struck by a sudden realization, her aunt's expression softened. "You've always had talent, Emily." "I see it now," she replied, her voice low but carrying an unmistakable reverence. "But I never knew the depth of what you carried inside." Emily felt a surge of warmth flood through her, a validation she had long yearned for, but never fully expected. As relief and pride mingled in her chest, she resolved to share the letter she had written alongside the painting. It was a raw and unfiltered account of her feelings, encapsulating her years masked by shadows. She handed it over, her hands trembling with a mix of anticipation and vulnerability. "I want you to read this. It's the narrative behind the artwork," she said, her words trembling as she gave life to her fervent request. Each line represented her fears faced head-on, every sentence a step toward reconciliation, not just with her aunt, but with herself. As her aunt read through the letter, Emily could practically hear the wheels turning in her mind. The studio transformed from a battleground of insecurities to a sanctuary of understanding. After what felt like hours, her aunt looked up, eyes glistening with unhidden emotion. "Emily, I had no idea," she whispered. "I've judged your path, but never took the time to understand it. You've poured your heart into this, your struggles, your passions. This is art." With each acknowledgement, barriers crumbled between them. For the first time in her life, Emily felt her existence validated, not just as a niece, but as a woman who had fought for her voice in a world that often dismissed her. The judgmental echoes of the past began to fade away, replaced by a flicker of possibility and connection. The air shimmered with newfound energy as Emily's heart swelled with pride and the lightness of liberation. She had reclaimed her narrative, faced her fears, and stepped into her identity with her art as both shield and mirror. "I'm ready to explore this path," Emily declared, no longer seeking approval, but inviting her aunt to join her on this journey of understanding and expression. "I want us to reconnect. This is just the beginning." Her aunt nodded, a smile breaking across her face. "Let us figure this out together. I'd like to learn about you. Truly learn. This is where we begin anew." With that declaration, The bond strained by years of missed connection and misunderstanding began to weave itself back into a tapestry of shared experiences and new aspirations. The path forward was clearer now both for Emily and her aunt. Emily stepped back and surveyed her artwork, the shifts in her heart reflected in the vivid strokes before her. She found solace in the colors she had so fearfully splashed across the canvas. It was more than just art. It was her life, unfolding before her like a breathtaking revelation, empowered, transformed, and finally recognized for her competence. Emily was no longer the girl haunted by emotional turmoil. She was becoming an artist, a creator of her own story, a fire with purpose. This moment encapsulated everything she had worked for: a promise to herself, a bridge to understanding, and a recognition that she was more than the sum of her struggles. She had achieved not only personal growth, but seized the legacy her aunt had left her, twisting it into a narrative uniquely hers. As Emily wiped the tears away, laughter mingled with her relieved breaths. She was ready to embrace whatever came next, stepping forward with solid confidence, her identity further established. In that moment, she possessed the power to fulfill her aspirations through her art, completely transformed and finally at peace with herself. Now, as a testament to her journey, Emily was prepared to share her story beyond the studio walls, ready to inspire others with her journey of reclamation, and she knew this was just the beginning of many chapters ahead. If this resonates with you, you need to subscribe now to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help stories of triumph thrive. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending below. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this powerful conclusion. Your support means the world, and together, we can uplift stories of personal overcoming.